Welcome to Kev's Travel Stories. Each week I'll be bringing you a story from the weird and wonderful world of travel, a world that can change the way you see life and love and even the way we find meaning. Places that are iconic and sometimes surprising and even terrifying. So sit back and enjoy while we go on a magical mystery tour together. Welcome to Kevin's Travel Stories, and this week I'm looking back on something that happens to all of us, a holiday romance. And for some reason, the very first time I went abroad and fell in love came back like an old ghost, an old friend, and I thought I'd share with you what it was like and that particular journey. I was 19. I was just about to start my course at London University at the Courtauld Institute of Art, no less, to study art history. My great friend Paul was also joining me on this trip, and he was at Norwich studying art history as well. We'd spent 5 years at Wimbledon College doing art, doing the O-levels, then the A-levels. We're the only two students doing it, and we'd immersed ourselves in architecture, sculpture, painting. We'd made the place in our hearts for Michelangelo, Leonardo, Raphael. And now we decided it was time to actually travel over to Rome, Florence and Venice and see them in the flesh, which you'd never done before. So that summer we went to Use It, which was the place that looked after student travel and gave very good rates. And we booked this 2-week course. You're going to arrive in Rome, you're going to stay a few days there before you went to Florence, and finally you would go to Venice. And in all 3 places you'd be given tours of all the major culturally important places. This was really a big deal. It was still expensive for us, so we both had to take summer jobs. I remember I swept the streets of Wimbledon and got enough money saved. And then we set off on our journey together. I'll never forget it. We had a chartered flight. We landed in at Leonardo da Vinci Airport. I remember getting out of the plane and feeling the difference, the heat prickling my skin, sweat appearing on my brow. It was evening time, that extraordinary smell of the pines and old brick. Is there anything like landing in Rome? And after the coach trip in, we lodged in this monastery, which was just beside the Colosseum and opposite the Circus Maximus. And that first night we went out to St. John of the Lateran and looked up at the ancient buildings and smelt the old brick and felt we'd arrived home because we knew all of these places so well. And suddenly they were alive in front of us. We could see the textures, smell the old paint of the paintings and feel the Roman warmth and history all the way back to the Roman Empire. So it was a fabulous opening to our trip. And I can remember being taken to the Vatican Museum, which we'd specialized in that period, and then on to St. Peter's for the very first time. And going into St. Peter's for the first time is like falling in love for the first time. It has a unique poignancy, which you can never capture again, however many times you go. So this trip had both this element of, wow, I'm seeing all this for the first time. And then slowly my heart was captured by this beautiful Mexican girl. It's strange because everybody on the trip was from London. There was a few from the north of England. We were just ordinary folk. And like all English people, we went particularly well dressed and we were quite pale. And the sun really didn't agree with our skin colouring. And suddenly in our group appeared these 2 Mexican girls, sallow-skinned, white teeth, dark black, the hair of a rook, so dark and so almost blue-black. And she had a twinkle in her eyes, and she was probably a little older than me. I was 19, she was maybe 20, 21. Her and her sister were touring, and they joined our group. And slowly, as things happen when you're that young, I started to gravitate towards them because they were a little bit more exotic, a little bit different. For a 19-year-old, my head was seriously turned just because of that difference and that energy that they had. And so our day followed a certain pattern. We all had breakfast in the monastery, And then we had an organised trip to see something of interest. Myself and Paul were very, very well educated. So I can remember we started to chat with the two Mexican girls and we started to have a bit of a laugh and then share some of our knowledge of the history. And as the trip moved on, we took a coach to Florence. Depth of understanding sprung up between us. And I started to fall, as you do, under that spell of fascination. Isn't that extraordinary how we become fascinated, particularly at a young age when it's first love? And this was probably my first sort of adult love affair. You feel like you're the moon being pulled into the orbit of this big, beautiful energy, this powerful force. And slowly I was captivated. And I can remember in Florence, we'd walk around and have gelati and laugh and joke. And I can find myself sidling up beside her, sitting next to them when we were having our communal evening meal. And slowly but surely, I was under her spell and falling in love. But what is that feeling like? When I look back, it's poignant, really. There's this sense that this is so overarchingly important, so big in the scale of things, so powerful. It's all romance and sex and longing, all wrapped into this indescribable ball. And I had no knowledge of women. So I was particularly keenly attracted, and this really felt important. And as things happen when you start to fall in love with someone, you get this panic that because it was a trip, and on a trip there's an end point, and they were going back to Mexico and I was going back to London, you'd have to make a move. Because there was no internet in those days. This would be a letter at best, which would take weeks to arrive. And I can remember we were down by the Arno, the Ponte Vecchio, and I plucked up my courage. And I said, when Paul had gone off with the other sister, meandering, I said, listen, I think there's something between us. I think we could be boyfriend and girlfriend. I really feel my heart is melting towards you. And then there's that moment, as we all know, when we have to lay our cards on the table. And we've all done it, dear listener, I know that. And there's that awful moment where there's that nanosecond of waiting. And in that nanosecond, you know the answer, for good or for bad. And sadly for me, it was for bad, because her smile and her warmth, and she was so beautiful and so welcoming. But I'd mistaken that for affection. And she said, Kevin, I'm not really interested. You're such a great guy. But no. I could remember my heart almost stopping. You know, that way when you want something so much and you're unconsciously reaching out to try to hug and grasp. And I just had to hug that empty space that now existed between us, and a space that would never be filled by her, because there's no going back when you've declared your love for someone and they don't feel it back. And there was that horrible moment of lostness, which I'm sure you've all experienced, where you feel you're in the desert and the sun will never shine. The sun's set and you're cold and you're shivering and you're all alone. And it's not a nice feeling. And Paul was such a good pal, you know, he sort of bore me up and jivered me along. And the next few days, particularly in Venice, were difficult because you've declared yourself and there's no going back from that. And there's a sort of an embarrassment. You try to chivvy along and keep the conversation going, but I couldn't hide my feelings. I've never been good at that, and it was awkward. And I don't think we even parted with swapping addresses. I think Paul swapped addresses and he may have kept in touch, but no, that was for me a broken heart and a sad ending. Well, it's interesting how life slowly recuperates and recovers, that there's no such thing as a gap. And over the weeks, life went on, and life at the Courtauld went on, and more art history and more adventures, and eventually more people that you're romantically linked to. I'll always remember that first encounter with the Mexican girls and the wonder of a holiday romance. And isn't that something that's so special? Because you're there in this limited time. There's an end to this, and you may never meet again. So whatever sparks may fly, they're either going to ignite and change your life or just peter out. And on this occasion, mine petered out. But on other occasions, it hasn't happened that way. But there was a bittersweet memory of that. And now I look back, and all I remember really, apart from that jolt, was the wonder of seeing Rome, the wonder of seeing Michelangelo, the wonder of seeing the Moses statue, the wonder of seeing the Sistine Chapel, the wonder of seeing Venice for the first time with the Bellinis and the sunlight on the river. Even though I'd seen it as a 12-year-old, it was like seeing it with new eyes through the history of art. And history of art was such a gift. So I've always remembered that, and I've always remembered Italy. And Italy is like a painting that reminds you that we do bear the crosses, disappointments, but there's something beautiful even in that. And I still can remember the smile and the look and the sparkle, the mischievous sparkle, as she looked at me and laughed. Those flashing white teeth. Wherever you are, I wish you well. And thank you for giving me that first great holiday romance, even though I did make a bit of an ass of myself, but I'm still here. Thank you, Venice, Florence, Rome, Michelangelo, and the wonder of art. I'll always have art history, and a broken heart does repair itself. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this, follow us on Instagram. My account, The Top Travel Destinations, has all the latest news about the stories we're covering, and so many of you enjoying what we're having to say, which is really heartwarming. So thank you for listening, and see you soon.